Alright, so last time we built Hangman, we kind of took this Hangman class and we built out a play method that deals with all this logic, the game loop and everything. And this time we're going to take a look back at this code and see if we can spot out the different responsibilities that this deals with and pull some of those out into different methods, different classes even. So I guess let's look at this first kind of from a practical perspective. If we were to unit test this, this would be a huge pain, largely because every piece of logic that we have is sitting inside of this while loop. So anything that we'd want to test, we'd have to somehow break out of this loop either with a win or lose condition just to test maybe that this regex works or any of these little bits and pieces. So I think the first thing I want to do is see if we can split out this while loop into something else. So if we think about how a game works is in this one there's a loop that's happening of ask the user for input, compare their input to the word that was there, update progress, and then repeat that whole thing. So I think one logical way to split this up is to have our Hangman class deal with just a single turn, have the logic of knowing this is how I get the input, this is how I compare it to the word and update progress, and then deal with the whole looping aspects elsewhere. Then we could test all of the real logic without worrying about the loop. So I think first what I'm going to do here is let's create a Hangman game class and a start method. So within the start method, what I want would be something like this. Whoops, not that. Let's kind of just take some of this code here. So I'm going to kind of write out code the way I feel like would read well and the way I'd like to see it. And then we'll kind of build out the actual code later. So I'd want to create a Hangman, and then I would want something like while Hangman has not ended, keep playing turns. And then here we would actually we'd start a Hangman game and we would start it. Okay, so then this would turn into play turn. We'd actually get rid of this whole looping aspect because now it's handled in Hangman game. And then we need to fix a couple points here. Next, become return because there's no longer a loop in this method. We can just return out of the method entirely. And we would need to create our new ended method. So what does it mean for the game to have ended? It means that I've either won or I've lost. And for me to have won, it means that the word, whoops, is equal to progress, right? Which is kind of the logic that we have here. We can actually change this to be if you've won. And similar here, this is actually going to be our lost condition. And I think that should be it for extracting the loop out and getting, a couple little helper methods just to make things a bit more readable. Let's try this. Pia. Okay, cool. Win condition works, and so does the lose condition. Great. So now let's see, what else can we do here? So there's a few responsibilities that this has, right? So the idea is for our Hangman class just to know the logic of Hangman, but we can see here that it knows directly how to interact with the client the command line and printing out messages, and similarly it knows how to prompt the user for input and grab that input. So I think I'm actually going to start with the getting input part because I feel like this is a different responsibility, and we can pull this out into a separate class. Right, so maybe we'll say we have a user input class, and I think I'm just going to make it a class method, and we'll say like get guess, and that means gets chomp down case, which is exactly what we had up here. So we'll change this, make it user input dot get guess, and let's see if it's still working for us. Nope, it is not. Let's see what happened here. Play turn, initialize constant, man user input. Oh, actually made this a definition, not a class. Here we go. So now everything still seems to work. So that seems maybe trivial or excessive at the moment, but what this lets us do is, let's say we actually make this a component that we pass in. Right, and we'll default it to user input. We'll say input.getGuess. This should still work. Yep, still seems to. But now, since it's a separate component on its own, let's say we have our game on display somewhere, and we want to demonstrate it to people without actually having to sit there and play on it all day, just to show people. We could create an AI input, which instead of prompting the user for a guess, all it does is say, take the alphabet from A to Z and grab one random letter. So now, if we took Hangman here and we passed in AI input to be used instead, the game just plays itself. All right, and that's pretty cool. So let's also start pulling some of this out, since we wouldn't necessarily deal with this directly. We want to be able to initialize a game with user input or AI input. Let's actually have this take options of take an input, and I'll pass you AI input when you initialize with that new. So initialize with options. We'll say input is options input, and if you didn't give us any options, we'll default you to an empty hash, and we'll say input defaults to user input. And here we just pass in our input. So now this should still play itself. All right, looks good. So now we've properly extracted out some of the logic for input. So let's go with display logic this time. So in a similar way, let's start up a new class. Let's say we have a CLI, command line interface. I'm not really sure if it's a great name for it, but have this handle the display logic instead of calling puts directly. Take a message, and we'll just put that message. And we'll kind of skip the intermediary step here, and we'll go ahead and say we accept a UI, which defaults to the command line UI equals UI. And now we'll just replace all these puts with at UI.display. Okay. Oops. Run it again. Everything seems to work. So now we've put out display logic that lets us do things like if we decide later we want a graphical interface or something even more simple. Let's say we want a file output. Then all we have to do is define a new component for it and say, instead of putting the message out to the command line, we actually want to write to this output file. We'll append to it. And we'll put the message in that file instead. And then we can change this around. We'll start accepting the UI. We'll pass in file output. Let's update our initialize. Oh, see a new line there. To say, if you give me a UI in the options, we'll use that. Otherwise, we'll default to the command line interface. And then go ahead and pass this into our Hangman class. So let's run it again. Didn't see any output, but now we have an output file. And if we take a look at that, there's output. All right, cool. So now we can switch back and forth between whether we want to use a file output or the command line. I think for now I'm going to keep it at command line just so you can see everything that happens. Oops. There we go. All right, so now that we've pulled those out, let's see what else we're missing here. So this play turn method still feels really big. If I want to know anything that happens, I got to kind of look through this and see, all right, what happens when you win somewhere in here? Yes, this code chunk here. So let's actually see what we can do about pulling things out here. I think what I want to do is, instead of this play turn caring about whether you've won or lost, I think I actually want our game to be the one that decides, right? Play turn should just be able to say, okay, here's the input, checking is the word, update the progress. And then the game loop itself should be the one that knows, okay, the game has ended, display the ending messages. So let's actually pull these messages out and put these into our game. So we'll start the game. While it hasn't ended, keep playing turns. And if the Hangman game was won, then display the message, because you don't need a return here. And then else, if you didn't win, then you must have lost, and say you lose. And then we can get rid of this bit here. All right, so we can test that out. Let's see. Yep, bunch of lose conditions, and don't think we're going to get lucky with a win. I think let's just change the kind of input that we pass in to user input. Let's just test our win condition real quick. And that works too. Cool. So let's see. Oh, that seems pretty well cleaned up so far. We've pulled out the guess logic, the input getting logic, the display. got our validation stuff. I guess if you were really eager to pull more things out, you could maybe create a guess class, and maybe inputs always return a guess, and then you could do validation inside of that guess class. So you'd have something like guess. If the guess is valid, then do this, or I guess if it's not valid, then do all of this UI.display message and return. But I think so far this looks pretty good. And then down here, if you wanted, maybe we'd want to add the ability to continue the game. I guess we can try and do that real quick. Let's say you would start a game, these things would happen. So what would it mean to continue? I guess we would prompt the user if they'd want to play again. And I think I always want to prompt the user. I don't think I'll ever want to use an AI, so I'm just going to keep this part hard-coded for right now. And what we'll do is UI.display. Would you like to play again? And give them the yes/no little prompt. And then we'll just return whether or not they said yes. And then we'll need a loop of something like, we'll maybe call this play. No, let's call this start. And let's call this one play. So we're going to kind of shift into, we're going to have another game loop. We will play the game once, then we'll prompt them if you'd like to play again, then play. And actually not if, it'll be while. As long as they keep saying yes, they'd like to play again, then keep playing. And this doesn't need to change. Let's go ahead and just make this an AI input. And let's see. Play again. Yes, 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 no. Cool. So now we have Hangman game. Whoops. Back over here. We have our Hangman game that has, it takes two components, one for the input stream, one for the output stream. Kind of cleaned up the code a little bit. And we've added continue functionality to it even. And we have two different ways to input, two different ways to output.